All right. Hello, hello, everybody. It's Rochelle, and we are going live today with the Artful Leader. And I'm super excited to have my special guest, Loretta Turner, here today. Woo woo.
Woohoo!
And I want to start by just doing a brief introduction of Loretta with her bio, and then we'll dive into getting to know her a little bit and just listen while you're hearing this bio for all the things that connect to what we're up to in the Artful Leaders Connect community. And for all those who are listening, let me pull this bio up. All the tabs. All right. So Loretta is a New Jersey native currently residing in the lovely city of San Diego. And she's known for her passion for empowering individuals and organizations that are dedicated to making their corners of the world a better place. So that's you, that's us, right? Loretta is an ICF accredited leadership coach and well-being strategist with over a decade of experience in both the nonprofit and wellness sectors. She's an exceptional conscious social entrepreneur, an executive coach, a leadership educator, and wellness practitioner with an expansive reach and experience across the social impact landscape. And she advocates for better systems that support the wholeness, joy, resiliency, and sustainability of the nonprofit and social impact workforce. Yes. And we're going to really get into this today. She enjoys blending the boundaries between doing good and being well. So welcome, Loretta. I'm so happy to finally have you on the Artful Leader.
I know. I'm so happy that this has come to fruition. I know we've connected in a lot of different places, a lot of different spaces, and here we are in another place in another space having a really good conversation.
Yes, I'm excited. So, well, tell us a little bit in your own words about yourself and what's alive for you today.
Hmm. Gosh, I feel like you covered a lot in the bio. But what's really relevant and alive for me today that is connected to who I am and really who I am in the now is goodness, there's so many things I could say, but I think what I just want to say is how much I'm enjoying gardening these days. Living in San Diego, well, New Jersey native, moved across the country 7 years ago. And I'm just learning that I moved to San Diego at a time where I guess the drought was more prevalent. And so I was very accustomed to it not raining all that much. And so these last couple of years, we've gotten a lot of rain, which has been lovely in its own right. But yeah, I'm really appreciating and really not taking for granted just how beautiful the city is and how great this weather is, and how much joy comes with being outdoors and getting your hands dirty and growing flowers from seedlings and making and growing your own vegetables. So that's been a life for me today. And I think that has a lot to do with one of the ways that I'm finding wellness in my life, which is just connecting to the earth, getting outdoors, getting vitamin D, making sure that I'm giving my body physically what it needs to be able to survive and thrive in this world. So yeah, that's been really relevant for me lately.
I love that. I love that. And I think so many of us can relate to that connection with nature that is just so fulfilling, right? And it offers such a space for us to be present with life in a way that's just so nurturing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm remembering the first time we actually met in person and sitting at a cafe and just sharing our journeys of work in the social impact sector and how we both kind of came to become these coach people and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And I just think your story is so relatable and also so inspiring. And I know so many folks that I work with and people in this community love to hear kind of courageous stories of folks like you, kind of been in the sector and then been like, I feel like I'm called to make some changes here
Hmm.
and find a way to do that. And so I'd love to hear about your journey towards leadership in our field.
Yes. And I love telling this story because even getting to hear it back every time I say it, I feel like I always learn something new or I start to connect dots that I hadn't connected before. So I have been in the nonprofit sector my entire career. I've been working in the sector for about 11 years. And I think, like a lot of folks who got into nonprofits, got in there by accident, just kind of stumbled my way through. I was actually gigging as a yoga teacher. That's where I really got my career started. I got my yoga teaching certificate, my goodness, probably 13 or 14 years ago.
Mm.
Was gigging, was teaching all around northern New Jersey, teaching inside studios, teaching inside corporate settings. And this was, again, like almost 15 years ago, so a little bit taboo then. But
Mm.
yeah, I was gigging and happened to find a nonprofit that was bringing yoga to, again, this was quite taboo when it was first starting out, but bringing yoga to prisons and to hospitals and to rehabilitation centers and homeless shelters. And I had just gotten my bachelor's in psychology. So I was really curious about, like, what is this intersection of yoga and psychological support, especially for folks who are really experiencing some of the toughest elements of being humans. And yeah, this nonprofit offered me some really, really, really wonderful opportunities to explore that. And then the next thing I know is working full time in a nonprofit. And like many folks, again, who get into nonprofits, kind of happened by accident. Also started wearing a lot of hats. I was doing everything from the social media to the recruitment to running the programs. And that sparked a curiosity for me just about like what nonprofits are and how they run and who gets to start them. And what was also happening at the same time, parallel to this curiosity about like why do nonprofits exist, was I was still gigging as a yoga teacher. And there was this weird thing that was happening for me, like even 11 years ago, where I was recognizing that myself, as well as my colleagues and a lot of the volunteer yoga teachers that I was supporting, were yoga teachers, right? So we had this language of self care and wellness and mind body connection and how to really know yourself and really love yourself. Like we had all those tools, we had that language. But then when we were working at the nonprofit, we were burnt out, we were overwhelmed, we felt under resourced. I had my first experience of vicarious trauma working at a nonprofit, like repeatedly showing up to a prison every week to teach yoga and not recognizing or realizing why was I, shaking on my way to the prison, or why was I crying on the way to the prison, right? So 11
Yeah.
years ago, I was curious, like, this work is really meaningful and it's really important and it's really needed, but I feel really awful when I do it. So like, how do we solve for this?
Yeah.
And, 11 years ago, I was in my early 20s and I was trying to give voice to something that I think 11 years ago, a lot of people weren't talking about, but it's ultimately something that I think became more prevalent on the other side of the pandemic, or really in the pandemic, that social impact professionals always show up big. We always go big when it comes to caring for community. And especially during the pandemic where there was so much happening and there were so many resources needed, once again, nonprofits were called on to make those things happen, right? To make the magic happen. And I think, I mean, the pandemic was really challenging in its own ways, but I think it did give us this insight and this gift of, hey, nonprofit folks, we see you showing up big, we see you going big, but you really can only do so much. And the pandemic is trying to teach you that. And that is where I really found my voice. And like, hey, I think I've actually been trying to say this for the last 11 years, that like nonprofit people, social impact people have historically been under resourced and have been quite literally expected to carry the weight of the world. So can we actually start to look at these inequities and start to have real and meaningful conversations about what it actually means to be a social impact professional, and how do we prioritize well-being in that work? So yeah, the curiosity finally turned into more question asking and more conversations. And now it is the reality that is my business, Do Good Leadership Collective, where we primarily focus on helping social impact professionals do good, which we know that people will do, but also how do we prioritize being well at the same time?
Yeah. Yeah. So important and so powerful. And I see so many parallels to my journey as well. I'm curious, in your work with the Do Good Leadership Collective, could you tell us just a little bit more about the collective? How does it work? Who's in it? All that.
Yeah, I love the collective. I love the collective. The collective is my baby. And the way it came to be was, I guess I should reiterate that I'm a coach and I'm a consultant, right? So my day job, so to speak, is working with groups and individuals who are primarily social impact professionals. So that's nonprofit folks, government folks, philanthropists, community organizers, advocates, right? Anyone who's trying to help their communities. Those are my people. But my day job is working with those people in deeper capacities, right? So one-on-one coaching, or a lot of organizations will bring me in to run workshops or to work with their staff. And because I'm primarily working within the social impact sector and the nonprofit sector, there's a lot of systems that need to change, and those systems are going to take time. And what I recognize is that I love that I get to do this coaching and this consulting work, and help, certain groups of people like slowly start to change their cultures or slowly start to prioritize well-being in their work. But I also recognize that there is a major need for these well-being resources to be accessed like now. And
Yeah.
so one of the arms of Do Good Leadership Collective, or really the collective piece, is, hey, how do we get this community together? How do we get these social impact people together and celebrate and practice well-being as a community? So the way
Mhm.
I see the collective, or the way I get the collective together, is we try to host monthly events that are really low cost, usually free, if not donation based. And we usually center some type of like soft skill leadership development topic. So we've done conversations on time management, we've done conversations on boundary setting. But what we always make sure to do is layer in elements of well-being, right? So our time management event was paired with a sound bath. So we can really give people access to this well-being tool that could quite literally help the health of your body. A couple weekends ago, we did like a breakfast gathering, which we nourished our participants with just some light bites and some coffee, and then brought them together around this conversation of soft skills and what does it look like to really establish your boundaries. So the collective does a lot of things, but to sum it up, I see it as a group of social impact professionals, primarily here in San Diego, that really want to be connected to other people who are passionate about taking care of themselves, and then working together to figure out how can we do this together.
Mhm. Yeah. So as you're talking about all these different folks that you're working with, I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you're discovering about the wellness of these leaders and these in the sector that are kind of standing out to you?
That's a great question. I think I'm always learning something new, like almost every day, about what this means to people. If I can kind of reflect on the journey that this has been, and what I think the trajectory might look like, I think at first, trying to understand like these wellness themes that wellness was like this water cooler topic. Like we weren't allowed to talk about being well at work. And
Mhm.
again, I think the pandemic kind of blew that up. Like,
Oh,
no, 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 no. We are going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it loudly. And so
mhm.
now that there are more spaces to really center well-being and more initiatives that are well-being focused, I think what I'm hearing in a lot of these rooms is that we don't have one definition of well-being. And I actually think that's a good thing, because there shouldn't be one definition of well-being. Well-being can be a number of things, and it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I think a big trend is trying to help not just individuals, but teams and organizations figure out like, well, how do y'all define well-being? I just had a great conversation with um, somebody in New York whose team is primarily immigrants, right? And they're serving primarily immigrants, African immigrants. And just in that conversation, I realized like, oh, the way those groups of people, or the way that the people that they're serving define well-being, can look completely different from folks that are maybe doing it on the West Coast or serving
Yeah.
different groups of people. So that's probably the biggest theme, right? How do we figure out what this actually means for us? And then how do we take an equitable approach to make sure that everyone has access to some level of well-being, regardless of how different it looks? I think another theme I'm seeing is that folks are really unsure of how to give voice to well-being advocacy. And I think that really starts with trying to understand the feelings that are coming up for you in your workplace, and what does well-being and wellness and wholeness and goodness actually feel like, and how do you articulate that? How do you say out loud to your colleagues, or to your boss, like, I am unwell? I think a lot of people from who I've talked to just haven't quite figured out how to articulate that clearly. And so that's another space that I'm really helping people with, like their emotional resilience and their ability to say out loud, like, this is how I'm feeling and this is how I would prefer to feel. So how do we get there?
Yeah, and I'm imagining, and also just based in my own experience of working in the field, there's a lot of power dynamics that make some of that tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that's the structure of work often. And how do we push back against those unhealthy structures that kind of keep us silent about what we're experiencing and noticing among our peers or the folks we're working with, all those kinds of things. So that's, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that makes a lot of sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, in that conversation around doing good and being well, like I was on a call today with a new community I'm a part of, Positive Intelligence, and we were talking about kind of that belief that all of us have been kind of conditioned into, which is like, if we want that peak performance or we want that success or whatever, that there's going to have to be a sacrifice of our wellness. Like one, it's going to be one
Mm.
or the other. And I think folks like me and you really take a stand for that. Actually, they need to be intertwined. And in order for us to be successful and sustainable and really doing the work that we're called to do in the world, that wellness component has to be nurtured at the same time.
100%. And this is actually reminding me of the playback event that I was just at,
Mhm.
because you were on stage, and the folks that you were doing work with like reflected back to me this same message. Like, and I feel like I've said this exact quote many, many times, but it still is very relevant. Like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And I think where things get particularly tricky, or where I think it becomes easy to justify like running on empty or sacrificing our well-being, is just the nature of nonprofit and social impact work, especially in and on the other side of the pandemic. The messaging, at least the messaging that I received, is it has to happen yesterday.
Right.
Like, and that is so hard to like push up against or to battle when, again, the messaging you're constantly receiving is, we haven't done enough, we haven't raised enough money, we haven't reached enough people, there's still more work to be done. Like that, I feel like that information is always coming down the pipeline. And so you just get to a point where the brain naturally is like, well, if this work really needs to get done, like I've got to figure out how to cut corners. And oftentimes the corner that gets cut is the wellness. Yeah, it's the self. It's not getting enough sleep. It's completely forgetting that you didn't eat during the day. It's isolating yourself because you just, justified that you don't have enough time to spend time with your family, or to spend time with your friends. And then when we think about structurally too, I mean, we have this very insidious system that has convinced people that the work needs to be done now, and your ability to do the work or the opportunity that you have in doing this work should just be enough. So please don't ask for a livable wage or for health insurance or for any benefit that would help you thrive in your life. So yeah, I mean, I think it's something that is really relevant for me, and it comes up a lot in my conversations, is there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the individual level, right? To be able to break up some of that narrative and saying like, the work will get done, and I also need to do work for myself to be able to do the other work, right? So there is a lot of self accountability that needs to happen, but then also system wise, like we need to break up and change these bigger narratives that have convinced an entire workforce of people that it's okay to endure bad pay and bad treatment in pursuit of good work.
Right. And I think as kind of a trauma informed practitioner myself, one of the things that I find really interesting about that sort of crisis oriented scarcity paradigm around not
Yes,
good enough, not enough money, all, this should have been done yesterday, all that kind of stuff, that keeps all of us in our survival response, in our nurture,
exactly.
right? Rather than in our like wise brain that is sort of our best self functioning in the workplace. It keeps us in this fear response, and
Mm,
all kinds of terrible things happen within our bodies, within our relationships, within the
yeah,
folks, between us and the folks that we're hoping to serve, because everybody's on their little alarm system is going off and
constantly.
literally flipping, right? And so it's like one of the things that I do a lot in my work is really helping people understand how important it is to slow down and set up these structures and set up these systems and get clear about these things, so you don't waste all your time in all the hijacking that happens when our nervous systems are in fear and
Hmm.
survival mode, right? And how do we take the time to set things up well so that we can then move forward and be efficient and reach those goals with a team that feels good,
Yeah.
right?
And my brain still bounces back and forth between, there's a level of self accountability in being able to
Yeah.
do that, but also there is like a systemic piece, right? Like, I think for me, like being able to really like raise my hand and say, I've got to tap out, I've got to take care of myself. It took a lot of courage to be able to see that within me. And honestly, like it took a couple of moments of like getting really close to my own rock bottom of having really struggled with my mental health, or I've just been kind of opening up to people that I went through a season kind of recently where I didn't realize that my hair was falling out. Right. So
Mm,
usually like I get to a point where I'm like, wait, wait, this is not worth it. I need to pause, I need to back up, I need to really assess the situation and make sure that I don't get into these, again, like scarcity mindset and just terrible habits that are sacrificing myself. But then I also think system wise too, that this has to come from a place top down of really making sure that people have reasonable workloads, because it's going to be really hard to justify taking the break or taking a step back or just trying to create more space for yourself if you're just set up for failure to begin with. And so that's why I do try to help individuals in building like that self confidence and that self advocacy and that self accountability relationship with themselves. Because once you can practice it with yourself, once you can ultimately prove yourself wrong and say like, oh yeah, taking a nap midday is actually fantastic, or like once you can start to build those practices that prove yourself wrong and help you see just how more efficient and how more sustainable you can be when you rest and prioritize your well-being, then you've got that data and you've got that courage and you've got that confidence to share it out, to share it with your colleagues, to share it with your supervisors. And yeah, I like to think that I help people to be like the seed that's planted in their culture that
mm,
is really just going to raise their hands and say, hey folks, this doesn't work and something's got to change. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from the last couple of years is from James Clear's book Atomic Habits, and
Yes.
he says, and I may butcher this quote, but my memory is that it's, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems.
Mm,
And it's like we could all be out here talking about like, yeah, we want to prioritize wellness, or yeah, we're trauma informed, or we're really putting DEI first, or whatever it is, right? But if we don't have really clear systems for how to do that in our own lives and with the team and within the organization, it's going to be really pretty words that sound really
exactly.
inspiring, but when are we actually going to see the needle really moved on those things? And so I'm really curious for you, when you're working with organizations or larger systems, like what are your ideas about how to systematize well-being?
Gosh, such a good question. And it's something I'm still really curious about. Like I think
Yeah, sure.
we're in an era where like we're all kind of co-creating this together. I'm following a little bit of work that's being put out by the Institute for Nonprofit Practice over in Boston, and I literally have, I mean, of my 6,000 tabs that are open, I have one tab in here that's got a Dropbox full of resources. But the biggest thing I'm pulling away from, how do we systematize this well-being within an organization, I think it comes back to defining what well-being really looks like and what it means to the team as it currently is. And then I think alongside that, and I feel like I've been tripped up with this and I've seen some other organizations be tripped up in this, is trying to figure out what that looks like equitably. i
Mhm.
think I think we've slowly started to move towards this culture of integrating well-being and wellness, but we do kind of like these blanket opportunities like, okay, like, yeah, everyone's going to have access to meditation at noon on the first Tuesday of the month, or everyone's going to have access to, some type of, wellness thing. And I don't think those efforts are a bad thing. I think
Mm.
having those additional pieces of support that can be accessible can be wonderful. But I think the bigger question, especially when it comes to like integrating this long term, is like, what is the culture of equity to begin with? And like, what does well-being and equity look like when you put those two things together? And
Mhm.
then I think once you can really define that for yourself, the organization has to get really honest about what it can or cannot do. I feel like I've worked in and have worked with a lot of organizations who have done the assessment around like, all right, what does well-being look like for our people? And then when they get the data back, they're a little in shock, like, wow, like where people are really suffering and there's a lot of resources that people need and we're not going to be able to do them all at once. And so how do we roll out a plan that can be really honest and transparent about where the organization is and what the organization is capable of, and then work collectively with the organization as a whole so that they feel like they have a voice in whatever well-being choice is going to be made. And it
Mm.
doesn't mean that everything gets implemented, but I think in my experience, what has been the most successful or the most meaningful is saying like, hey, we heard you. We recognize that these 50 things, like in an ideal world, we would make them all happen, but we might only be able to afford to do 1 to 2 in the next year. And this is how we would like to try to achieve that together. It reminds me of this really great quote from Patrick Lencioni. I think I'm saying his last name right. It's just this idea that you want to give people an opportunity to disagree and then they'll commit. And so I think the biggest thing in implementing some of these well-being programs into organizations and culture is to just make sure everybody has an opportunity to talk about what they need. And then again, collectively co-create, give people an opportunity to vote or to disagree, and then choose together, like, hey, what do we want for ourselves as an organization? The other thing I would add on to this, and now I'm like digging into some system stuff, is I think it's so helpful to have these conversations with your organizations and with your teams and build this wish list because then that is data that you can bring to a funder or whoever the organization is looking to help financially resource the organization and say, hey, we're taking a moment to intentionally hear what our people have to say. These are the type of wellness initiatives that they need, and we need you to pay for it. Right. So I think again, we're very much in the midst of like, how do we do this? But from the research I've been doing and from the conversations I've been having and listening to, it's assessing what people need, getting clear on what or how the organization practices equity, and then also looking at the folks that are resourcing the organization and saying, like, hey, if you love this mission and you want to see us continue to do this for the next 5 or 10 years, let's meet the things that people need right now. Can you help us fund this?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things that I'm really curious about, especially for organizations that maybe aren't as healthy financially, or who are, so many of the organizations I've worked with are smaller nonprofits, and you maybe have a founder who's just super passionate, or different things like that, and there aren't a lot of resources. Um, I feel like there's just some core stuff with well-being that really is about like relationships,
Oh, yeah.
communication, and how do we run meetings, and how do
Mhm.
we make decisions, and all of those things where it's like we could offer yoga and meditation, and even have an expressive arts practitioner come in and do art or whatever. But if you don't have those really core healthy components, all of that is going to be cool, but is it really going to establish a place that people feel a sense of belonging, and a place where they really want to be?
Mhm.
Think like, because I've talked to folks and been like, well, what's the communication like? What's the leader? How's the leader talking to people? And so all those things are really interesting to me too, and the role that they play in well-being and equity as well, right? Like, and I feel
Yeah.
like all of those things are all interconnected, and wellness and mental health and healthy relationships. And I don't know, to me, it's just such a cluster of things that have to be working together.
I totally agree. And I think you're driving a point home that I made earlier is that there is not one definition of
Right.
well-being. And for some of these organizations, the well-being might be like, hey, how do we like have less meetings, or how do we have clear communication, or how do we reset the expectation button of what we're supposed to be doing in this role. I was listening to this podcast the other day. It was from a funder perspective of how do you resource organizations right now for the long term. And she was sharing that her organization gives these general operating grants. And, it's very cool in the sense that it's like trust-based philanthropy and they don't ask for reporting, but they do ask the organization, like, hey, like, how was this money most meaningful? And she said that she heard back from a few of her grantees that they put that money towards conflict resolution, like just
Mm,
quite literally like investing and infusing that money into making sure that the communication got cleared up and that people got to just get over the hump or just get over the issue that's been like tearing at them for months and months and months. It actually reminds me of a contract that I had for a little while, very proactive and like kind of unheard of. But there was a leadership transition, and the leader that was leaving was the founder, and so obviously there's a lot of investment on behalf of the founder to be letting go of something they created, and they were bringing in a new executive director, and I was on contract to work with both of them exclusively and to just talk through any hard feelings and communication styles and any tensions or resentments that might be building as they're doing this critical but also very tender handoff. And so I say that because they were actually a very, very, very small organization. But I think that proactive kind of thinking can be really helpful. And then again, normalizing that our leaders and really all of our nonprofit, all of our social impact staff, yeah, well-being might look like having a resource to help people just communicate and say what needs to be said and figure out, well, how do we continue to talk about this in a really effective way going forward?
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think it is so important for all of these things to be so individualized, because I think when we come in with some sort of cookie cutter practice from somewhere else, right? And I sometimes I have people reach out to me and be like, "Well, do you have something about this?" And I'm like, "Let me get in here, hear your story, hear from your people, what's going on for you, and then have
Hmm.
something to respond to what's actually going on for you." Because I could come with some cool activities or these kinds of things, but if it's not really meeting the rubber where it hits the road, like, we're not gonna get anywhere,
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. I think there's, again, a lot of power in getting everybody involved in choosing, like, what does this look like for us? And, you know, how cool would it be to have an opportunity to have your entire team come together and like build your own wellness program and have it speak to as much as it can all of the individual needs of yeah, everyone who's making the work happen.
Yeah, and how do you tap into the natural leaders and strengths that are already there? If somebody's like, "I love to bring tamales on Friday," or, just
Yeah.
different people who are like, "I love reading books and I wanna do a book club," or, there's just so many cool things that people can contribute to a culture, so it doesn't have to be all top down. It can really come and emerge from the beautiful individuals that are in the space.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just because you've also driven home the point so much in our conversation today about how important it is for each of us to have that commitment to that self work, right?
Hmm.
And like
Hmm.
we want to do systemic work and all that stuff, but there's only so much of that that we can control, right? But we can
100%.
we can control this as much as possible. I'm just really curious for you, like, what are your practices or resources that you're tapping into just for your own self-work right now?
Hmm. I would say right now my resources are pretty diverse and also very colorful. That's
Mm,
but that's always how I've been. I mean, even in girlhood, I mean, my parents had me involved in track, but also cheerleading, but also dance, right? So I've always been a jack of all trades, especially when it comes to my hobbies. But the things that are really standing out right now that are keeping me like accountable and resourced is therapy. And I've been in therapy, for years, but like I'm just feeling right now like I want to kind of like triple down on it and just like make sure that I consistently have that kind of talk space to
Yeah.
um yeah, talk and give voice to what's coming up. And I will even equate having a coach to being, as important as therapy. Not that I'm necessarily trying to self promote, but like as a coach, I know that it does a lot of good for people to just have a regular space to just open up and be curious and ask questions. So just some type of like one on one professional support, I think, has been really huge for me. Movement has been critical. I do Brazilian Zouk, and I have a group that I feel really accountable to every Wednesday night. I make sure to get my movement in, and it's not just movement, right? Like it's not just moving my own body, it's also practicing movement and trusting movement with another person. And so that's been also a great way to fill my social cup. The weather's warming up, so I'm getting back outdoors. I'm gardening. I'm getting my hands dirty. I'm also getting back to live music, right? Making sure that I'm enjoying the arts and also just enjoying the arts in other spaces. I got to see you in playback theater the other night. That was lovely. I'm also doing a lot of alone time, a lot of me time, right? Weather is warming up. Everybody wants to do everything. Living in San Diego, there's always something to do. And I also make sure that I carve out at least 2, if not 3 days a week where like my evening is clear. And so I just have some me time. I might, even get artsy with myself. I do a lot of vision boarding every month. I try to like play with some new visions about what I'm feeling and try to make sense of it. I watch a lot of RuPaul's Drag Race. Um, I do a lot of cooking for myself. I like playing with new recipes. All of those things are things that I like to do in the privacy of my own space. So I have some like quiet self reflection. I could probably go on, but those are probably the top things that are
Yeah.
really, really standing out to me. Yeah.
Love those. And thank you for just the vulnerable shares. Yeah, on what it really takes to, to show up fully in the work and to have that rich, balanced life. It's all those things. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think another thing I'd add on to that is keeping those things scheduled regularly is really critical. Someone said to me in actually one of my wellness or well-being events a couple of weeks ago, I schedule my self-care like I schedule my meetings.
Mhm.
And I mean, if you saw my calendar, you'd be like, why are there so many colors and why is there so much overlap? But it's because there are things that like I make sure to have on my calendar every single week. And sometimes I can't make it. Sometimes things come up, but like I have a standing rock climbing appointment with some girlfriends every Monday at 4:30, and just knowing that it's there every week is just that reminder of like this is important and this is important and
Yeah.
this is important. Another thing I do in addition to having my stuff regularly scheduled is like knowing what my threshold is for like when I need to take a break.
Mhm.
Yesterday, I hit that threshold before noon. I don't know what it was about the day, but before 12 o'clock came, I could just feel it all like boiling up to my jawline. And I'm like, there it is, the place that I don't want to be operating from. So, you know what? I'm just going to walk away from my computer for 30 minutes. And I ended up gardening a little bit, got my hands in the dirt, got myself grounded, got myself regulated, and came back to the work later. So definitely a balance between like make sure you've got your stuff scheduled regularly and also know what your threshold is and have some back pocket well-being for when you need to tap into it in an instant. Sometimes my back pocket well-being is like, okay, it's time for child's pose. It's
Yeah.
time to just get on the ground and be close to the ground for the next 20 minutes. But just having those practices in mind have been very, very critical for me.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that you kind of mentioned the range of things because that's something that I've been building for myself is like I have those luxurious bigger pockets of things that are really feed me, but then I've got like my 2-minute meditations that I do like
Hmm.
3 or 4 times a day, where it's just like take a moment to breathe, touch my fingertips, feel my toes on the floor, just little things that just like whew, get me back up here and not out of that like survival brain. And that is so helpful. Like it's so great to have a toolkit for a whole lot of things. And for those of us that
Yeah.
have a lot going on, sometimes there's this sort of excuse or I don't have time, right? But there are really small things that we can do to shift up. And I think, just those little things like gardening or a delicious cup of tea or a child's pose or whatever. Those things can be really
Hmm.
impactful.
Or
Yeah.
or even stuff. I mean, some of this stuff does feel like it's self-soothing, but also like I like having self-care back pocket things. Like,
Mhm.
okay, I need a break. Guess what? I'm going to fold the laundry because it's been sitting around the house for almost 2 months. So having that list of like, this is a thing that needs to get done, and if I don't want to be at my computer right now, then this is a great opportunity to do the laundry, to do the dishes, to vacuum, to
Yeah.
whatever it might be. So I like to keep those things in mind too, because I always feel so much better when I'm done with them. And it truly is an act of self-care to do some of those things.
Yeah, I love that distinction that you're making between self-soothing and care, like moving your life forward in meaning like maintenance things that are meaning
Yes.
to. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, I feel like with so many of the folks that come on here, we could talk forever.
Yeah.
We have a day ahead of us. But is there any final message or anything you want to share with folks listening as we wrap up today?
Hmm. Gosh, I don't know if there's anything that's really jumping out at me, but probably in general, just make sure to put your oxygen mask on first. I'm a big fan of astrology. I know that Mercury's in retrograde, all this craziness is happening. I pulled a card the other day when I was in my meditation, and it said, you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. That's
Mm,
really resonating with me these days. And yeah, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of people asking a lot of you all the time, I'm sure. And I feel like there's a lot of people asking a lot of me, and I'm a single woman who lives alone, right? So I
yeah.
can't imagine like how it gets more intense when you have a partner or you have family that lives here or you've got kids, right? But the quote is just still resonating with me. Like, hey,
Mm,
you can still really love on your community and the people around you without having to set yourself aflame, right? It's not your responsibility to keep people warm. There are other ways that you can help people stay warm that doesn't sacrifice your own health or your own warmth or all that you are. And just keep practicing it. Just keep practicing what that looks like.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and you have an event coming up, right? Where
I
people
do.
come and practice with you.
Yes, come practice. Come practice in community. So the next event we're going to be hosting is on April 20th. It's a Saturday, Saturday at 10 a.m. At Cafe X. This is kind of a series in the events that we do in which we have these breakfast gatherings, right? We bring folks together at a local cafe, usually a cafe that is also community impact or social impact focused. Cafe X is definitely one of those places. And we try to keep the group intimate, like under 15 people. And we have a topic of discussion, and we do journaling and activities, and we
Mm,
just have opportunities to connect. And the topic for Saturday the 20th will be how to cultivate a community or a network of support. I think there's a lot of research out right now, especially like coming down from the I think it's the Surgeon General, that loneliness is like one of the top things that's like really running people down and really a threat to our existence. And I know a lot of people are seeking community right now, and there's not really a handbook or like a one size fits all approach to building community. And so if that's something you're looking for, come hang out with us on the 20th. We've got again some exercises and some prompts that'll give you some ideas on how to do that. And then when you show up, you're already in community, so you're already practicing it.
yeah, yeah. Love that. When we get off the call, send me links or whatever, and I'll make sure to post those kind of things too. I really want to try to come to one of your events soon. And I know keep those who are listening, there might be an event with me and Loretta at some point in the future.
Yes.
Maybe doing something with the arts and do good leadership. But if you're watching the replay on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, follow Loretta on Instagram at Do Good Leadership and at Loretta.leads. She's also on LinkedIn and all the places. And yeah, I love all of the messages that you shared today and so many great practices and a vision for a workforce that is really thriving and healing the world in the ways that
Mhm.
have happened. So thank you so much for being with us today. Such a pleasure to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And thank you for everyone who is listening.
Yay.